All right, class, I have an interesting problem for you. Imagine that you are on a lifeboat, and there are 10 people on the lifeboat because your ship has sunk, but there's only enough food for 5 of you. So if each of you takes half as much food, you'll all die of starvation within 5 days. But if 5 of you have enough food, but 5 don't eat anything, the likelihood is at least those 5 will live until you can be rescued. What do you think you ought to do? Well, this isn't a simple question, is it? But anybody, you can relate to it, even though you've never, have you ever been in a lifeboat after a shipwreck? No, but I look at your eyes, you're interested, your eyes have opened up, you're smiling, even Eliza is smiling. And so the point here is, and it's a principle of problem-based learning, engage the students with something interesting, get them engaged, and then you say, all right, now this is a class in philosophy. It's a class in ethics. This is an ethical question. What's the right thing to do? Is it right to sacrifice the lives of 5 to save 5? Or is it more ethical that everybody should die equally? Well, different. How would you argue each position? What does Aristotle say? What does St. Thomas Aquinas say? What does John Rawls say? And now they go back and they read the philosophers with much more. Now they're trying to solve the lifeboat problem, not trying to memorize the philosophers so they can pass Joanna's exam. Now notice, I just gave you, in 3 minutes, faculty development. I began to try to teach you to teach. But you can do this. You can do this by looking at other models. And so I say we are doing more of that in the United States. There is more and more faculty development where new PhDs, first of all, we're putting this into PhD programs. So before you can get a PhD, you not only get trained in research, you take seminars and workshops in teaching students. You get experience teaching students at the same university that you're getting your PhD in, or sometimes there's an agreement with a local community college, and you get to do some teaching in the community college while you're getting your PhD at the university. And then on top of it, many universities, not enough, are now, when they hire a new faculty member, saying, for the first couple of years that you're on the faculty, we consider you a professor in training. It's like a medical resident. We know that part of your job is to work, but part of it is to learn to be better at this work. And it's the work of teaching. So I think we have some progress here. I find, and I've been working with people for 40 years in this area, that many people want to be teachers. That they've wanted to be a teacher from the earliest age. Go look at the way 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds play. And you'll see very often the 5-year-old little girl gets the younger kids together and says, I'm the teacher, now you sit there, don't you? Isn't that true? Teaching they love the thing that keeps people out of teaching. There are 2 things that keep people out of teaching below the university level. One is they are not paid what they deserve. They are paid terribly low wages, and that is a corrupt sin of our societies, yours and mine, that we pay the most important people in the society the lowest wage. We pay someone, a surgeon, who fixes a toenail 10 times as much as we pay a teacher who fixes a mind. What kind of reasonable society does that? And yet that's what we do. So the first reason why it becomes difficult to attract people to teaching is the same reason that it's become difficult to attract them to become priests or nuns. Why? They don't want to live their life as a life of deprivation. They want to enjoy a good life. And I tell you that when we raise the salary of teachers, many, many more people want to come and teach. Many more. You can see that in part in the United States and in many parts of the world. You know, the economy has gone down badly in the last 2 years. I understand Brazil is doing better than the United States, and you should be very, very happy at that. But as the economy goes down and some of these very high-paying jobs in banking and in stock markets and in law disappear, guess what happens? More and more people apply to become teachers. The supply of candidates for teaching shoots up dramatically every time there's an economic downturn. Why? Because it was only the absence of money that kept people from wanting to be teachers. What could be more exciting? You spend your day surrounded by young people who are exciting and interesting, and they're growing and they have great futures, and you interact with them. And what do you interact around? Around the subject you love the most. Do you love to read? I don't know, Joanna, do you love to read? Imagine spending your life being able to read your favorite novels and plays and short stories and poems, and you get paid for that, and you do it with children, and you watch their eyes light up. You know, that's a good job. But you've got to pay people enough to make it worthwhile. That's one reason people don't go into school teaching. The second is what you call troublemakers, especially in our poorer areas, not exclusively, but especially. The students come from homes that do not motivate them to achieve well in school. They get bored very quickly. They then create management and discipline problems in the classroom. Sometimes they get angry at teachers and they threaten the teacher. And all of this makes teaching uncomfortable. It's just uncomfortable. And I always find it interesting that because they have trouble dealing with students who are difficult, who are troublemakers, we don't have enough people going into teaching. But at least in the United States, we have thousands of people who want to be policemen, where their whole job is dealing with troublemakers. And I ask them why. And they say, well, I have a gun and I have a club, and I'm being paid well and I get a very good pension. And people respect the policeman. They show them respect. You never see a parent say to a kid, you see that policeman? Don't pay any attention to what he tells you to do. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Teachers, they don't have a gun. I'm not suggesting they should. They don't have a club. They have to deal with the troublemaker through establishing a relationship of empathy, of understanding, sometimes of love, you know? Many of us loved our teachers, and our teachers loved us and cared about it. And so teaching is a tough job. It really is a tough, difficult job. And that sometimes lowers the motivation. How do you deal with that? Again, the answer is often economic. Find ways to lower the size of classes. So they're not teaching 40 students at a time. They're teaching 20. Opportunity to see more, you know, to touch more kids, so you're not surrounded by so many kids asking for help at the same time. There are ways, we understand, for making teaching less difficult. But in the final analysis, teaching is a very hard job. For a job that hard, we should be paying people a lot more and giving them a lot more support.
Do you know how much is the income, the yearly income for a teacher in the primary school?
In the United States? Yeah. First of all, you have to understand that in the United States, all teachers, whether they teach grade 1 or grade 12, must have a bachelor's degree. They must be graduates of a college or university. So they must already have completed the first degree. And in general, in the United States, not entirely, but in general, teachers of first grade and teachers of 12th grade earn the same salary. We do not give different salaries. It's the preschool for 3- and 4-year-olds get lower salaries, which is a shame. But once you're teaching in a regular kindergarten through 12th grade system, you are paid the same amount. I would say it varies. I mean, it's different from district to district. I would say on the average, teachers will begin teaching for about $35,000 United States dollars a year. $35,000 a year, and they teach for 10 months, not for 12 months. They teach from September until June, through June, and they are on leave, on holiday from in July and August. And after 20 years, they can be earning $60,000 or $70,000 or $80,000 a year. No, these are not bad salaries at all. But if you compare it to, say, an accountant, they're not as good. But being an accountant is a much easier job than being a teacher. Even if you must work 12 months, the fact is, being an accountant compared to being a teacher is easy. I think being a doctor is easier than being a teacher, because a doctor only has to deal with one patient at a time. The teacher has 30 or 40 all around at the same time. So all these things together, the salaries are much better now than they used to be. When I first began teaching, I began teaching 45 years ago at the university, at the same time that my wife began teaching 4th grade at the elementary school. In 1963, I, as a university professor, a brand new one with a PhD, earned $9,000 a year. Now, that was a long time ago. I felt very wealthy. And my wife earned $4,500 a year. So between the two of us, and we didn't have any kids yet, we felt very, very fortunate. As I say, now I would say that the beginning university teacher will be making $45,000 a year, $40,000 a year. But the beginning public school teacher will already be making between 25 and 35. But the cost of living is high, and they should earn more. I'm not complaining about university salaries. I'm complaining about...
So do you think it's all linked? Because you said you have a challenge to have a better education for the young in the United States. So is it all linked? Because since you don't have attractive salaries for the teachers, you won't get the best teachers for the kids, so and then you won't have a better education. Is it all linked to the system?
Well, everything is linked to everything else in general, so nothing is independent. I would add 2 or 3 changes to what you've said. First of all, we have been talking about the educational system as a system, but we have made no mention except in passing of the economic system in general for the society, the political system, and the social structure of the society. And education is embedded in all of that. It's part of all of that. And so if we had a society in which there were less poor people, in which there were less people who were hopeless about their future, then we would also have a society in which we had fewer children who learned hopelessness from their parents, because the troublemakers that you describe, if you ask why are they troublemakers, very often it's because they have no hope. They don't see jobs available. They don't see mobility available to them. And when you're hopeless, you make trouble. You know, I'm not excusing it. I'm simply saying there's a connection there. we've ignored the fact that it is a system embedded in the economic system, the political system, the social structure. And in each of our societies, we have economic and social systems in which large segments of the society, because they are economically not successful, because they feel politically disempowered, grow up with a sense of hopelessness. The thing that motivates children and teachers to learn is hope. Because learning in school is always dependent on deferring your gratification now in the hopes that if you study well now, you study this algebra, you study this division or history, that you're doing that now in the hope that sometime in the future it will open up opportunities for you that you can live however you define the good life. But what if you enter into a situation and you don't have any hope? You are hopeless. And your parents have told you you're hopeless. And now you come to school and the school says, we are here to educate you because if you learn these things, doors will open up to you in the future. And you don't believe it. You say, no. That's a myth. That's a myth. I don't believe in myths. I don't believe in Mount Olympus. I don't believe in Zeus. I don't believe in all this stuff. And this is a fairy tale you're telling me. Now, I can speak for myself. My parents were both immigrants to the United States who were very poor. My mother never finished second grade. She stopped school at second grade and went to work. My father graduated high school, and that's it, nothing more. They owned a small shop that was open 7 days a week. A small shop. They didn't own a car until I was 16 years old, and then they bought a used car. But they always had hope for education. They always said to me, if you pursue education seriously, nothing will be closed to you. And they taught me that lesson. And so I went through school, even the very boring parts, with a sense of hope, with an expectation that something better would happen. Now, did my parents think I would become a university professor or the president of a great foundation? No. They had never heard of a foundation, and they'd never gone to the university. It didn't matter. They brought me up with a sense of hope in the educational system and in a society that would open doors for me if I earned my way through. And so you can't separate the function of the economic and social structure from the possibility of education doing its job.
But how do you help people? How do you bring hope?
How do you bring hope?
To the hopeless.
I think it happens through different routes for different people. For some parts of society, hope comes from their church, from their priest or their minister or their rabbi, who tells them about education, who gives them, through the preaching they do and through the work they do in the church, a sense of hope. And the churches have been a very important source of hope for many people. And even though churches can also create great damage in other ways, I'm not here to propose religion as the solution to all of life's problems, the churches play an important role. Community centers outside of school. I'm sure you have them in Brazil. Youth groups, teams and clubs often introduce hope. The kids come to play soccer. But part of the job of the coach, very often, if the coaches are well prepared, is to talk to the students about how life is like soccer. That if people work together, they can reach their goals. And if they don't work together, the other team scores all the goals, and they spend their time only in their end. You know, you bring in role models very powerful in the school, in the church, and in the clubs to bring people in from the outside, and somebody says, you know, I grew up in this neighborhood. I don't live here anymore. Let me tell you how I got there. And they begin to describe their own narrative. So there are a variety of ways. The truth in both of our societies is that although it is a terrible burden to be poor, each of our societies is a society with many stories, true stories, of people who overcome the burdens of poverty and make it through education into a much broader life. We must keep on telling those stories. We must use our schools, our churches, our clubs, and the media. What role is the media playing? The media shows programs about the very rich and about teachers and physicians and engineers. But does it tell stories about how people get to there from much more modest beginnings? The media have a very, very powerful impact on aspirations. So the schools are very important tools for success, but not alone. It must be done in collaboration with other institutions and elements of society, or the school is always floating down the river but in the wrong direction. The current is moving the other way. So yes, I'm hopeful.
Good, good. I wrote a program about John Dewey, and he used to discuss this learning by doing, this different kind of teaching.
Sure.
And it seems that we've been discussing this for the 20th century, how to move from traditional education to something different, has to go with the society, because the society changes. Now we have a very technological society, and it seems that the schools are behind. So with all the research, I mean, why is it so hard to
Why is it
change?
hard? Well, it's hard to change. It's hard to change everything. I mean, change is hard to do. The schools, first let me say that where John Dewey was wrong was in thinking that in order to introduce new methods, you had to destroy all the old methods. You don't have to destroy tradition in order to improve upon it, because sometimes what I call the wisdom of practice, the way things have always been done, has a certain quality to it. When I would get sick, my mother was only second grade education. She would make me chicken soup, and I would eat hot chicken soup, and I'd feel much better. And you know what? Chicken soup is still good for you in the age of transistors and the microprocessors and the Wi-Fi. There is nothing wrong with a teacher standing up in front of a classroom and saying in a very engaging way to a class, let me tell you a story. Students, let me explain something difficult to you. It's when you do it 5 hours a day, 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year, that it deadens the mind. And so the first thing we have to learn is that you don't solve the problem of the old ways by destroying them and replacing them with entirely new ways. First of all, there's many good things about the old ways. But second, because psychologically people will resist. Even when an old way doesn't work very well, we become very comfortable with it. We become comfortable with familiar sources of failure. And it's a big risk to embark on unfamiliar possibilities of success. Part of the problem is that kids, well, let me put it another way. If we succeed in changing education, and I think we will, if we succeed in changing education, it will not be only because teachers change. Education is a partnership. It's a partnership between teachers and students. They must both engage in the change. The students in many ways are more ready than the teachers now. This is an age of the internet. This is an age in which even poor kids play video games, and go online. They search the web in their schools. They interact with people they've never met by email. The students are ready for some pretty big changes. And now our challenge is to make sure to prepare the teachers to introduce the changes that the students are ready for. We see examples in the United States, and I'm sure you see them in Brazil. This is my first visit to Brazil, so I don't know your schools. I'm sure you can find schools in your big cities like São Paulo and in some of your smaller villages where some of these things are already going on in local public schools. And we must learn to study those successes, to publicize them, get the journalists like you out to go and video and interview and study unusually effective schools. I mean, you're doing this program from USP Leste, which is a university campus that is dedicated to introducing new approaches to teaching students. Many of the students, this is the first in their family to go to a university. And they're doing it in important areas of service to other people. That's what they're studying. And these problem-based methods that they're learning, I think, will motivate the students to achieve. Because when you learn from a problem, you not only get engaged with the problem. What if you were on a lifeboat? But you don't use a lifeboat all the time. You use, what if you were working with somebody who was 80 years old and you've got to help them with this and that aspect of your life, and one day they come to you and ask you this: what should I do about my son who wants to take all my money because he says I don't need it anymore? I'm an old man. What shall I tell him? And you're a student studying gerontology, which is one of the fields that they teach here in USP Est, because the number of old people in the society is growing, and they need special services. Now that gives me also a window to look at what my actual job is going to be. I'm going to be asked to help older people deal with the problems of life, and now you're giving me a chance to do that at the beginning of my university career. How exciting can that be? I mean, so I think I'm very optimistic that some of the kinds of approaches to learning, you see, my dream, Joanna, is that we will learn to use approaches like this with kids who are 6 and 7 years old, because they deal with problems all the time. You have only a pizza big enough for 4 people, and there are 6 people at the table. What are you going to do? It's cut into 4 pieces. How are you going to serve 6 people? Well, that's the beginning of understanding fractions. That the same pizza that can be cut into 4 pieces can actually be cut into 6 pieces too. It's a principle of mathematics, but it works with pizza. So it's problem-based learning. In fact, if you bring the pizza in, it'll get cold, but you can still do the job and then put it in the microwave. Yeah. So I remain optimistic about these things.
Great. Well, thank you.
You're welcome, Joanna.
Thanks very much.
Thank you for the interview.
Very nice.
Okay.